Let us begin with the perspectives, starting with the topic of the communal content. As we know that Chief Justice of India raised concerns about the communalization of news. So news getting a communal color. So this he tried to object. So there are, as we know, there is unregulated social media platforms today, and social media can ultimately become a menace for society. So for this, we have the IT rules also, but we must see how this regulation will ultimately help solve the problem of the communal content in the news. So regulation may not serve as an effective deterrent as on every occasion. So, for example, several TV channels, are supposedly the better regulated on entities than social media. They were also part of this campaign of hate mongering against the Tablighi Jamaat episode last year. So therefore, we must go beyond this thing. So the communalization of the wider ambience in which society and media must function, that we must see. So because we are trying to live in a secular democracy. So looking at some more from the same theme which came up was so the same theme was repeated by the CJI. So that was first thing about the hate news. Yeah, for example, if you see Chief Justice of India, his anguish is spot on. Channels communalizing news. That was the because there's a problem, and then is right that is right and has done the right thing. He's flagged the problem that everything in the country is shown with the communal angle by a section of media, especially the Tablighi Jamaat episode. The court lament about no control on web portals and platform without accountability. So, unfortunately, an instance of not framing the problem is full complexity. The IT rules are there as we discussed. The communalization of news. So this episode of communalization of news, partly because of decisions taken in some newsrooms and boardrooms. So they are intentional, to spread that communal virus in society. So arguing for the controls by the state is simply to ignore the larger context of how the political, social, economic system functions, or risking the potential of crampling the constitutionally guaranteed fundamental rights to freedom of speech and expression. So truth is that the press and the audience are on the same side. Freedom of press, as we know, is essential and it's an inextricable part of people's right to know. So, next issue is about the Nipah virus, how it is returned in the Kerala. So, as we know, it's part of zoonotic diseases. So, zoonotic virus that can be transmitted from humans to animals, such as the fruit bats and pigs. These are the hosts of the Nipah. So, disease, no, in contrast with COVID, it has a high fatality rate, and currently we don't have any known treatment or vaccine which is available for Nipah virus, same like the last outbreak. Central and state is government to take up the containment measures with mutual trust and coordination. So urgent steps that need to be taken jointly include these are the normal steps which in the current situation must be done is contact tracing first has to be ensured. Once you've contact traced the person, you must isolate them. You must quarantine them in a place. You must isolate them from the rest. Just collect some samples, move the samples for laboratory testing, and you must do some detailed study of the surrounding area by the NCDC, that is the National Center for Disease Control, from an epidemiological point of view. So these kind of steps should be taken. So there's a need for strict enforcement of COVID appropriate public behavior because COVID is not. No, in fact, it is Kerala which is contributing to highest number of COVID cases, and at the same time, they get this burden of Nipah also. And the containment zones need to be defined with a special focus on high transmission clusters. So this is the issue with respect to COVID and Nipah in Kerala. So moving forward, as we know that the Tamil Nadu Assembly recently passed a law allowing 7.5% reservation for students of government-run and aided schools in professional courses, including engineering, agriculture, and law. So, according to the Union Education Ministry's performance grading index, this was the index of Union Education Ministry. So, Tamil Nadu was in the top five states in the country. The overall, know how if you see in terms of performance grading index, but if you see look closer, you find that the state score in terms of pillars of the index such as access, infrastructure, maybe equity, governance, it is ranked 22nd on learning outcomes. So it is ranked on very low on the learning outcomes perspective. So this issue of you know it's very in terms of outcomes they are poor. This is what this fact highlights. So next is about the monetization of public assets, as we know, because of national monetization pipeline. But now federal angle has come up to this that can center, it can it unilaterally privatize the assets of the government without taking the states into confidence. So maybe not also adequately compensating the states. This is the dimension which has opened up now. The Tamil Nadu government's opposition to the Delhi's asset monetization program, it has thrown back the focus on federalism in the country. So this is the context. Federalism issue has again popped up with this episode of national monetization pipeline. So as we see that Tamil Nadu governments they have opposed this, citing federal reasons. That the Tamil Nadu Industries Minister said that Delhi should consult the state because if you see the land ultimately is a state subject, and these assets were given by the states, long by maybe sometimes free of cost. This land were given for creating assets. Tamil Nadu, for example, has given a vast tract of land for establishing the Salem steel plant. So this, because of the developmental need, this was done back then. Now, Centre's airport privatization plan, it had also, had faced such a similar roadblock previously. So the Kerala government had moved the apex court to oppose the privatization of Trivandrum International Airport. So the Kerala government had moved the apex court to oppose the privatization of the Trivandrum International Airport. And then since it is a central dispute, center and state dispute, the Kerala High Court, it is said that it can be decided only by the Supreme Court because it falls under the original exclusive jurisdiction of the Supreme Court under Article 131 of the Constitution. So that's why the case is still pending. But as we know, land plays a vital role in most of the public assets in the country. So in the absence of any system of revenue sharing as we see today, the monetization of public assets with the state governments, the center can't afford to push these decisions unilaterally. So this we must always understand that the perspective when we see towards monetization of public assets, there has to be state concurrence because it's a federal issue. So discussions and conciliation and a revenue sharing model needs to be adopted here so that a healthy balance is maintained in federalism in the country. So this aspect has to be kept in mind that how do you tone down the state's concern? It's either you can compensate them or you can adopt a proper revenue sharing model so that the federalism's concerns are taken care. So this is one perspective when you talk about the monetization of pipeline assets. So moving forward, as we talked recently about the Delhi government's communal riots, which is happening 35 years, worst communal riots will happen 35 years, since 35 years. This brings into question the role of police. So as we talk about largely the issue of police reforms in the country and also accompanied prison reforms and jail reforms, this question brings into question the role of police and its ability to act impartially in such a free environment of free of political influence. So this is the context in which we're talking. So especially in matters related to in the famous Prakash Singh case, which we discussed earlier, so that there's matters related to transfers or postings or promotions. So on these matters, we need urgent reforms. So this was the context in which the entire episode talking. So it is time that the police are free from such interferences, largely political, so that the personal acts like a true public servant and they must be committed to the constitution, not to the government in hand. So act like true public servants and not be the servants of the political party they serve. So true public servants not serving the political parties they serve. This is the perspective we must remember. A way forward is to emulate the defense forces. So as when you compare police to defense forces, so police defense forces they have their own boards, to decide on postings and transfers. Such a board can also be made for police to reduce interference. This is the perspective here we are talking about. Then, so moving on, this is a debate on the representation which CGI has raised again. So I'm damn sure that NG or CGI Ramana's tenure will be remembered because of so many uh, progressive thoughts he has brought forward in the, from the CGI's position. It matters a lot. So CGI on Saturday said that he would prefer at least 50% reservation for women in judiciary at all levels. So as we know, currently, there's just 11% representation in the bench, as we know. So this they have achieved with great difficulty, is what the CGI is trying to hint at. So there are some structural lacuna in the Indian legal system. There are certain structural lacunas in the Indian legal system, such as the underrepresentation of women in the benches. So these issues, currently we have only four women chief justices, and out of the overall 34 talked about. Story of incremental inclusion. So this we are talking as an incremental inclusion. So itself is a testimony to the history and reality of exclusion, that how slowly women enter the judiciary. So according to the government data, out of the 677 sitting judges in both the Supreme Court and High Court, only 81 are women. So this is roughly 12% is the issue. So there's a near uniform trend of the proportion of women judges. The new uniform trend of proportion of women judges decreasing as one moves up, the higher the court. So this trend we must always remember that the proportion of women who reach the top, ultimately there's a uniform trend of decreasing. So it says this. This is said by the Vidhi legal report, and there are a range of reasons for why it is not only in judiciary. In fact, this invisible glass ceiling acts at every sphere. For example, women have to negotiate multiple obligations. It is harder to meet the minimum criteria of 7 years, which is fixed for no continuous practice to be eligible to be a district judge. No fewer women are in litigation. We know this litigation thing. The collegium system suffers from inherent biases, as you all know, for progression in the uh, legal profession, as much as a product of old, often male bastion networks in other areas. Higher numbers and greater visibility of women in courts. So, what will this do? What will the entry of women in the judiciary do? So, this itself will give confidence to reduce the inherent systematic biases, gender biases, which is present in the system with respect to questions of gender. It can also open door for alternative, inclusive, legal perspective. Right? We can also talk about legal perspective on interpretations in that sense, and then enhance the legitimacy of the judiciary for inclusion. Creates a wider sense of ownership. So there's a wider sense of ownership in the community also. This is a perspective on the women's inclusion, gender inclusion, and how the CJ wants to see ultimately in the future that 50% women should be in the judiciary. So moving on, as we see the issue of floods happening annually in Bihar, so now the concept has been stretched to a situation where we are asking for a siltation policy. For the floods, Bihar has asked the center to frame a national silting policy, so, and to revisit the design of Faraka barrage. So this is the call from the Bihar government. So others pin the blame. Why do floods happen? Some say siltation. No, the other reasons are blaming of embankments, maybe dams, maybe small barrages, right, for restricting the river during the monsoon. So and obstructing water from retreating into an embanked river, resulting in prolonging of floods and water logging. So this is the idea with respect to the floods, that dams is one thing, siltation is another thing, monsoon is other thing, and then waterlogging condition because of this. Though they have become a recurring danger to sustainability of the status of open defecation. Now we can link that floods can also hamper the progress which has already been made under the open defecation free status for the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. So this is the perspective which we can talk about. So, they threaten the toilet structures, as we know, which are built under the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan and prevent the user access from during the difficult times. And then lack of sanitation facilities can also lead to contamination of soil. Right? Lack of sanitation facilities can lead to contamination of soil, um, surface water, or groundwater, and create major public health risk. So this lack of sanitation facilities, it can also lead to such thing. It can lead to contamination of soil, surface, or groundwater. This is ultimately a public health risk. As you know, in a flood-prone state like Bihar, it is important that the governments take into account the ecological, always ecological, hydrogeological variations of flood typologies, location on the habitations, and floodscapes to ensure that development funds are not wasted. In a broad perspective, that what ideas they must keep in mind. They have to keep in mind the ecological perspective, hydrogeological perspective, because it's geography ultimately. And then, this beneficial toilets are elevated. If they're elevated, ensure ecological sanitation by treating excreta as a valuable and manageable resource, protect and conserve water, and sanitize a fecal material. The thing, and then work toward building the flood resilient habitat, which is the convergence of different aspects of life. For example, drinking water, sanitation, livelihood, housing, education, and health. So to save the cost of human lives. So this is how flood resilient habitat should focus on multiple things, not just only on floods, but also on the aspect of sanitation and such things. So moving forward, as we see the constant tussle between development and conservation in Himalayan thing. So we know the Tapovan Vishnugarh project, which was destroyed by a flash flood in the Chamoli district in February. So it becomes unwise to push hydroelectric projects in such a situation. So not only hydroelectric thing here in Himalayas, we can just see what are the projects. It's not only about hydroelectric; it's also the highways. One typical is the Chardham project, which will connect Hindu Shrine, Gangotri, Yamunotri, Badrinath, and Kedarnath. It has been contributed to back-to-back landslides. As we speak, I think NH5 also has been blocked because of the landslide there. So Chardham Road has witnessed 25 major landslides this season, so forcing the closure of two stretches of roads at Tehri Garhwal for indefinite periods. So in the era of climate crisis, as we know, climate crisis is acknowledged and extreme weather events taking place. Himalayas can only endure only limited development. They cannot cross the carrying capacity because they are very ecologically fragile. So Himalayas cannot endure the kind of rampant construction, like the highways, the buildings, the tourist infrastructure. It may be the highways, dams that need large scale. What do these projects need? They ultimately you call for hill cutting. You will change the land use pattern to some other unsustainable way. You fragment the natural ecosystem, and you also overexploit the resources. So resources perspective is overexploitation. Land use pattern is changing, unsustainability, hill cutting, slope stability getting affected, geology and such things, making the slope unstable, making it prone for more landslides, and you also fragment the natural system. Need of the hour is to go slow, evaluate what has been done, and draw up sustainable development plan, not just for Uttarakhand but all the Himalayan states. So this perspective to be kept in mind. So keep their fragile ecology, not short-term or economic considerations at the heart of decision making. So this should be the perspective that you must keep ecology in mind while framing such decisions in a region which is ecologically fragile. It's also a biodiversity hotspot. So moving forward, as we already talked about the thing, so serious fever, we know that dengue outbreak is happening in UP. So if we have to draw a broad parallel, it is COVID dominating in Kerala, and then Nipah virus again making a return in Kerala, and then talk about in UP how there is dengue in the post monsoon phenomena, which happens because of the poor sanitation conditions. One can say this is how the country is entirely affected because of such recurrent outbreaks, epidemics topic, and then para athletes. So when you talk about the disabled population, especially their performance when compared to the current Paralympics. So they have done some exemplary performance because they represent only 2.2% of population, and they finished 24th in the table with 19 medals, featuring five gold medals, eight silvers, and the six bronzes. See what has happened is in our nation there is a sporting culture is sacrificed. So we sacrifice sporting culture at the altar of academic excellence. There is academic excellence which takes precedence over sporting culture in our country, and any news about such a success, generally is a system altering result because it's a system change because now we focus more on academic excellence, but such results also should inspire people. So challenges for differentially able are tougher, as we know, considering the body's limitations they have. So these we must not see this as some limitations. They cope up with through sheer willpower. They try to cope up with their bodily limitations, and then there is secondary task of overcoming. Apart from overcoming their bodily limitations, a task of overcoming society's innate skepticism is also there. In 2016, an audit initiated by the government agencies it did not find a single building that was completely accessible to the differentially abled. So, seen in that context, what India's Paralympic contingent achieved is mind-boggling. Right? Because when you find that not even a single building was completely accessible to the differential able people, you can just think about the infrastructure in the country to encourage them to participate in sports. So yet they strove towards excellence. So that is the thing which matters. So a reflexive reward exercise is on from governments and corporate sector. But if a percentage of those riches, if they are allocated to improve the sports infrastructure for the disabled, India will have more reasons for cheer in the coming years. So we must always try to look at long-term perspective and try to focus on building such a sports infrastructure. So moving on, as we see this America's involvement, always interference will always be there. So it begs us to ask the question where America's involvement will it end? But we know that Afghanistan situation it has just created a power vacuum where regional powers such as Russia, China, through its BRI, Russia, trying to influence in the region, Pakistan trying to fill that power vacuum. So no, this was a messy pullout of the troops. But what we can talk here is about the classical historical cycles. So there's the historical cycles, which is interesting to note in Afghanistan of the foreign occupation. The historical cycles of foreign occupation. There is a regime change which happens. Foreign occupation will happen. Then you will topple the regime change, and then there's the pull out of the foreign regime. Foreign occupation ends, and then again it becomes a place of lawlessness, and then orthodoxy like Taliban and such things creep in. So this is the and becoming a hub of terror outfits in the neighborhood. So this is how Afghanistan has been in the past. That cycle of uh, historical cycles, foreign occupation, regime change, is abandonment, slip into lawlessness, orthodoxy, such things. So this is one perspective about the American interference. Moving forward. This article talks about two, three examples of how America has a rich history of toppling governments. You can always quote that in the first half of 20th century it was in North America, and then post Cold War it came to countries like Iran, Indonesia, Venezuela, etc. So this is a and then coming to Taliban angle. So as we know, we ended our month-long presidency in the United Security Council. So we adopted a resolution 2593 condemning terrorism and urging Taliban to ensure human rights in Afghanistan. So it also followed on three discussions under India's chairmanship that have set out expectations from the new regime, such as they must uphold the rights, they must push for a more inclusive, negotiated political settlement for the government, and condemning all acts of terror, including the recent Kabul attack. They must condemn prevent any future attacks. They must not allow Afghanistan to become a breeding ground of terrorism in that sense. So this is one perspective. So apart from that, Now, this is a very interesting article about climate change. One with respect to the rising temperature in cities, another is the air pollution, both being important in terms of urbanization. So, Calcutta has been indefinite identified as an IPCC report as having a recorded maximum rise in warming over the past 7 decades. Map in the IPCC report shows that from 1950 to 2018, Calcutta area recorded the highest rise of 2.6 degrees Celsius among cities. So, among cities, it's Calcutta which has recorded the highest rise. There were several factors such as chaotic urban development, falling of rampant felling of trees, disappearing wetlands. Wetlands act as carbon sinks. The city is losing lakes, rapid deterioration of wetlands, giving way for concrete structure would also mean that temperature would rise for cities. Calcutta was known for high, uh, East Kolkata wetlands were very famous. The spike in industrial emissions because of industrialization, driven urbanization, vehicular pollution in the cities, there's population pressure, there is lack of drainage facilities. Apart from the temperature rise, frequency of compound events like climate-related phenomena occurring in unison, this will increase the air precipitation, and also Kolkata or Bengal being a coastal state, the threat of sea level rise, and also cyclone. Recently, we saw about how Amphan destroyed the Sundarban mangroves also wreaked havoc together. So this is the fact. And then modernizing infrastructure, encouraging climate resilient construction, greening transport, providing jobs for non-polluting industries, as we saw pollution, industrial pollution. So cutting emissions, these are steps which can be taken to solve the chaos of urbanization once. And now coming to the matter of urban air pollution, very important thing that air pollution is a silent killer. It eats away almost 9 years of a person's life in North India. This is a report which is brought about the worst polluted regions in the Indo-Gangetic Plain, including Delhi. About 40% of the population lives in the Gangetic Plain. So Delhi is the most polluted, where air pollution has shortened life by almost a decade. Almost a decade it has shortened life. So this is the impact. And UP is closest at 9.5 years. WHO guidelines say that the PM 2.5 levels should not go beyond 10 microns per cubic meter. So this is the limit which WHO is setting. But we found that average concentration of PM 2.5 was 70 microns per cubic meter. It's the highest in the world. This is the perspective. And then these particles are ultra fine and pass through the lungs and then carry the bloodstream, nearly expose all the cells. These particles cause head to toe harm, heart, lung diseases to diabetes, dementia, cancer, brittle bones, damaged skin, and fertility also. This is the damage which air pollution does. It is head to toe harm. Uh, a simple word it sums up that it can damage the entire body. Three factors which can attribute towards air pollution here are garbage burning, open dump burning, there's construction which is an issue, and then there's transportation also causes air pollution in India. So biomass burning pollutes the air in the rural areas along with seasonal stubble burning. So this aspect we must keep in mind that biomass burning pollutes the air in rural India along with the seasonal stubble burning. So National Clean Air Program is aimed at cutting the particulate pollution by at least a third at 2017 levels by 2024. This was about the National Clean Air Program. And then if that is achieved, national life expectancy may increase by about 2 years. So life expectancy can increase by about 2 years and 3.5 years for residents of northern region. On top of it, violation of environmental rules is also rampant. So it is now imperative to reduce traffic-based air pollution by carpooling, by sharing taxis, using bicycles and public transport, owning CNG and electric vehicles, improving the road signs. So such things can be done for better roads to avoid jams, etc. So shifting towards the solar energy. This is the perspective on this issue. So very important how pollution it takes away almost 9 years person's life in North India. Also, as you know, because of heavy rains in Delhi, most in, almost say highest in 19 years, waterlogging, traffic, all these issues, fatal risk of even electrocution. So this is the issue, and also there are post-monsoon diseases such as dengue. So this is the issue. So this issue is important from the vaccine equity perspective that vaccine producing nations are the richer countries. They are vaccinating their population at a very fast pace. So vaccine equity, is leaving the poor countries, because poor countries they don't have production facilities, their financial constraints it makes import difficult. There is inadequate distribution of infrastructure and vaccination facilities and lack of early planning for some reasons. So low coverage in some parts of the world not only pose dangers to life and health of people in those areas, but also lead to emergence of new variants. So this is the issue that if the if there is low coverage, what happens? Not only dangers them, but also it can lead to emergence of newer variants, which can ultimately make the vaccines ineffective. So providing more vaccines to poor world is not just a moral and humanitarian perspective imperative. It is in the interest of rich nations to do so. So, the COVAX program, as we saw, seeks to provide vaccines to over 90 countries, flagging lack of support and resources. It needs greater support from other better placed countries. So, this issue very important from the ethics perspective. Also, vaccine equity. This issue we've talked about. We also talked about the issue of diabetes, capital, heart-related diseases, food content, nutrition. So, about the healthy lifestyle is the issue. Then yeah, I think we've talked about this air pollution issue also. That reiterating same that high density air pollutants will lead to low life expect. So you have, this is issue of life expectancy related to air pollution. So we know the report that air pollution can reduce life expectancy of Indians by 9 years. And then later a study by Medicals and Lancet concluded that life expectancy in India, but the quality of life, noted that the Indians did increase their life of expectancy, but people are living more years with illness and disability. So United Nations predictions show that life expectancy would rise to over 81 years by about. But what would the quality of life? So here we can see some data that life expectancy among states ranging from 77 in Kerala to 69 in UP. Note that air pollution may contribute to many deaths, the top risk factor in terms of deaths in India. And these two facts we can conclude that air pollution is a big factor of life expectancy. So Kerala being higher than the UP. So this is a direct link towards air pollution and life expectancy is a one practical example. Honor killing, yes, we've talked about honor killing, the role. So we've talked most of the things about air pollution, things, media, combination of media. Yeah, this is a essay issue.